Sometimes the storm brings not destruction, but salvation. In the wild heart of the prairie, two broken souls discover that love can bloom even in the harshest soil when courage meets kindness. The thunder rolled across the Nebraska plains like cannon fire, shaking the windows of Martha Coleman's modest homestead. She pressed her weathered face against the glass, watching lightning split the darkening sky like the devil's own pitchfork. Through the driving rain that fell in sheets across the prairie, a lone rider emerged from the storm, his fury, his horse stumbling with bone-deep exhaustion. The stranger wore a wide-brimmed hat pulled low against the howling wind, his long coat whipping behind him like the black wings of some avenging angel. His Mustang moved with the labored, broken gait of an animal pushed far beyond endurance, foam flecking its muzzle as it fought against the storm. Martha watched from her window as he dismounted near her broken cattle pen, studying the tornado damage with the keen, calculating eye of someone who understood destruction intimately. The recent twister had torn through her property like God's own wrath, scattering fence posts and rails across the muddy ground like matchsticks. Without invitation, without even a glance toward her house, and certainly without any discussion of payment, the man began gathering the scattered timber. His movements were precise and economical, like those of a predator conserving energy for the hunt ahead. Martha grabbed her late husband's old woolen blanket and filled a tin cup with steaming tea from the pot she kept warm on the stove. Wrapping her shawl tight against the storm's bite, she stepped into the tempest, his teeth, rain immediately soaking through her calico dress. "Mister," she called over the wind, this mournful howl, her voice nearly lost in the storm, this rage. He looked up slowly, and she found herself staring into eyes the color of winter sky, pale blue and cautious as a timber wolf's. Water dripped steadily from his hat brim as he accepted the tea with nothing more than a slight nod of acknowledgement. On his saddle, worn smooth by countless miles, she noticed initials carved deep into the leather with deliberate care. D.H. Jake Hunter, he said simply, his voice rough and unused, like gravel grinding underfoot. That night, he slept in her barn like a wild creature seeking shelter from the storm, never once asking permission to enter her house or even approaching her door. Martha lay awake in her narrow bed, listening to the thunder, its dying rumble, and the rain, this steady drumbeat on her tin roof, wondering what manner of man had ridden out of the tempest to mend her broken fences without being asked, and what demons might be chasing him across the endless prairie darkness. Throughout the following week, Martha and Jake developed a peculiar understanding based on mutual respect and shared labor. She would prepare meals and carry them out to where he worked, watching him rebuild her storm-ravaged homestead with the tireless determination of a man accustomed to hard living. He never spoke unless necessary, communicating instead through the steady rhythm of his hammer and the careful precision of his repair work. The neighbors from Prairie Village began to whisper and speculate about the widow Coleman harboring a drifter. Mrs. Patterson from the general store made pointed comments about women living alone and the dangers of taking in strangers. Martha responded to their gossip with restrained courtesy and clipped words that discouraged further discussion. "You always this quiet?" Jake asked one evening as she brought him supper near the rebuilt cattle pen. "I talk to folks worth talking to," Martha replied, setting down the plate of beans and cornbread. "Most people around here just want to hear themselves speak." Their connection strengthened through the shared work of restoration. Jake rebuilt the cattle pen with posts sunk deep and rails fitted tight, work that would last through prairie winters and spring floods. He patched the roof where hail had torn away shingles, his movements sure and practiced despite the danger's height. Martha found herself anticipating his needs, bringing tools before he asked and keeping fresh water nearby as he labored under the relentless sun. The townspeople continued their speculation, but Martha paid them less mind with each passing day. She had grown accustomed to Jake's presence, to the sound of his work beginning before dawn and continuing past sunset. He moved around her property with the careful awareness of someone who had learned to read danger in every shadow, yet his presence brought her a peace she had not known since before her husband's death. When Sunday came, Jake worked despite the day of rest, prompting another visit from Mrs. Patterson and her sharp-tongued companion, Mrs. Thornton. "Martha Coleman, what will people think?" Mrs. Patterson demanded, standing stiff-backed in her best dress. A Christian woman allowing a vagrant to desecrate the Sabbath with his hammering and sawing. "They can think what they please," Martha answered evenly. "My fences need mending, storm or no storm, Sunday or Monday." The women departed with disapproving glances, but Martha felt no shame. She had found something precious in the quiet partnership she and Jake had built together. As the repair work neared completion, Martha and Jake began sharing their painful memories during the quiet evening hours. They sat on the porch steps, watching the sun sink behind the endless prairie grass, and spoke of the ghosts that haunted them both. Jake revealed that he had once served as an army scout, tracking through territories where civilization ended and savage wilderness began. He had participated in campaigns against the Indian tribes, witnessing and participating in violence that scarred his soul deeper than any physical wound. "I grew tired of death," he said quietly, staring at his calloused hands. "Tired of counting scalps and burning villages. A man can only see so much blood before it starts poisoning his dreams." Martha listened without judgment, recognizing in his words the weight of memories that could not be forgotten. In turn, she spoke of her late husband, Thomas, a man whose tyranny had made their home a prison of silence and fear. "He would not allow me to sing lullabies to our children," she whispered, her voice catching. "Said it would make them weak. When the fever took them both that winter, I had not sung to them in months. I have carried that silence like a stone in my chest ever since." Their conversations grew deeper as they recognized similar wounds in each other. Both had been shaped by loss and isolation, learning to survive in a world that showed little mercy to the broken-hearted. The townspeople continued their disapproval, but Martha found herself caring less about their opinions and more about the quiet companionship Jake offered. "Why did you stop here?" she asked one evening. "You could have ridden past like a dozen others." Jake was quiet for a long moment, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. "Maybe I was tired of running. Maybe I saw something worth stopping for." His words hung between them like a bridge neither was quite ready to cross, but Martha felt something stirring in her chest that had been dormant since her children died. Hope was a dangerous thing for people like them, but it grew anyway, stubborn as prairie grass pushing through hard ground. The repair work was nearly finished, and Martha knew that soon Jake would have no reason to stay. The thought filled her with a loneliness sharper than any she had known, even in the darkest days of her marriage. Martha and Jake began planting a garden behind the house, symbolically sowing seeds of a future neither dared speak aloud. They worked side by side in the rich prairie soil, their hands occasionally brushing as they planted rows of beans, corn, and squash. The simple act of cultivating life felt like a quiet rebellion against all the death and destruction they had known. Mrs. Thornton, the banker's wife, arrived one morning with sharp questions and sharper warnings. She stood rigid in her finest dress, her face pinched with disapproval as she surveyed the neat garden rows. "Martha Coleman, the entire town is talking about this vagrant you have taken in," she declared, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "A woman without a husband must be above reproach. Your reputation affects us all." Martha straightened from her weeding, dirt under her fingernails and sun warming her face. "My reputation is my own concern, Mrs. Thornton. This man has done nothing but honest work while others have done nothing but talk. Honest work or not, people are beginning to question your judgment. Some are even suggesting that perhaps you are not fit to maintain this property alone." The threat hung in the air like smoke from a grass fire. Martha felt her jaw clench, but she kept her voice steady. "Then perhaps those people should mind their own affairs and let me mind mine." Mrs. Thornton departed with a swish of skirts and a final warning about the dangers of defying community standards. Martha slammed the door firmly behind her, while Jake continued working in the garden, seemingly unaffected by the confrontation but undoubtedly aware of every word. That evening, Martha carried supper to the barn where Jake had made his temporary home among the hay bales and farm tools. She set down the plate and fixed him with a direct stare. "What are your plans, Jake Hunter?" she asked, her voice steady despite the uncertainty gnawing at her chest. He looked up from his meal, those winter blue eyes meeting hers without flinching. "I reckon that depends on whether I am welcome to make any." Their conversation that night was the most honest either had shared in years, touching on belonging and self-worth, on the difference between surviving and truly living. Small signs of caring began to appear, wildflowers left on her doorstep, shared meals eaten in comfortable silence, and the growing understanding that they were both learning to trust again despite the world's determination to keep them apart. Sheriff Wilson arrived on a dusty Tuesday afternoon, his badge catching the sunlight as he dismounted from his bay gelding. Jake continued repairing the barn door, but Martha noticed the subtle shift in his posture, the way his hand moved closer to the tools that could serve as weapons if necessary. Mrs. Coleman, the sheriff said, touching his hat brim. I have had some complaints about your boarder here. Nothing specific, mind you, but folks are concerned. Martha wiped her hands on her apron, meeting the lawman's gaze steadily. Concerned about what, Sheriff? About honest work being done or about their own idle gossip? Sheriff Wilson glanced at Jake, who had straightened but made no threatening moves. Just be careful, both of you. Do not give the townspeople any reason to take matters into their own hands. After the sheriff departed, Martha and Jake found their relationship deepening through shared moments of quiet intimacy. She began singing old songs while she worked, melodies that reminded Jake of his mother's voice before consumption took her when he was 12. He found himself moving closer to the house during his work, drawn by the sound of her humming as she kneaded bread or mended clothes. Martha baked an apple pie simply because she wanted to, the first time she had cooked for pleasure rather than necessity in years. Jake tasted it with the reverence of a man who had not eaten homemade pastry in decades, his eyes closing as he savored each bite. My mother used to make apple pie, he said quietly. I had forgotten what it tasted like until now. Their conversations became more personal as they discussed lost families and the silence that had shaped their lives. Martha spoke of the songs she had not sung, the laughter her husband had forbidden. Jake shared memories of trekking through mountain passes, of the terrible beauty of wilderness untouched by civilization. However, this hostility continued to escalate. One evening, a group of angry men gathered at the edge of Martha's property, their voices carrying across the prairie as they debated what to do about the situation. Martha stood on her porch, her chin raised defiantly as she faced them down. This is my land, she called out, her voice carrying clearly in the still air. I will decide who works it and who does not. If you have grievances, state them plainly or leave my property. The men muttered among themselves but eventually dispersed, though their message was clear. This patience was wearing thin. The smell of smoke awakened Martha in the dead of night, acrid and raw in the prairie air. She rushed to her window to see orange flames licking at the barn walls, the structure Jake had called home for weeks now consumed by deliberate fire. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she threw on her wrapper and ran barefoot across the yard. Jake was already fighting the blaze, hauling buckets of water from the well with mechanical precision. Martha joined him without a word, their partnership forged stronger in the face of destruction. They worked shoulder to shoulder, passing buckets in desperate rhythm, their faces streaked with soot and sweat as they battled to save what they could. The fire had been set expertly, designed to spread quickly through the dry hay and seasoned timber. They managed to save the stone foundation and part of the eastern wall, but the message was unmistakably clear. The town wanted them separated, and violence was now acceptable to achieve that goal. They could have killed you, Martha whispered as they stood watching the smoldering ruins, her voice shaking with more than exhaustion. Jake, his jaw was set hard as granite, his winter-pale eyes reflecting the dying flames. They were counting on me running. That is what they want most of all. The arson struck Martha as more than an attack on her property. It felt like an assault on everything she and Jake had built together. The barn had been more than just shelter for him. It had symbolized their partnership, their quiet rebellion against a world determined to keep them apart. Sheriff Wilson investigated the next morning, walking through the ashes with practiced eyes, but he found no witnesses willing to come forward. The townspeople preferred not to see crimes that served their purposes. I cannot arrest shadows and suspicions, he told Martha, his voice heavy with frustration. But I would advise you both to be extra careful. This will not be the end of it. Instead of rebuilding the barn, Martha and Jake made a decision that surprised them both. They cleared the burned foundation completely and prepared the ground for an expanded garden. If the town wanted to destroy what they had built, they would choose growth over reconstruction, hope over fear. We planted together, Martha said, her hand still trembling slightly from the night. It's trauma. Whatever grows here will be ours, not theirs to burn. Jake nodded, understanding the deeper meaning behind her words. They were choosing each other over the safety that distance might have provided. After the barn fire, Jake considered leaving to protect Martha from further trouble, but she confronted him with a truth that cut deeper than any blade. They stood in the kitchen where morning light streamed through gingham curtains, the smell of coffee and burned timber still lingering in the air. I never needed a savior, Jake Hunter, Martha said, her voice steady but fierce. I needed the chance to choose my own path, and I choose this. I choose what we have built together, even if the whole town burns it down. Her words hit him like a physical blow, stripping away the noble justifications he had constructed for his planned departure. She was not asking to be rescued. She was demanding to be respected as a woman capable of making her own decisions, regardless of the consequences. Jake abandoned his plans to leave and committed himself fully to their partnership. "Then we face whatever comes together," he said, the words feeling like a vow spoken before God himself. The storekeeper began refusing to serve Martha, forcing Jake to ride to neighboring settlements for supplies. The 20-mile journey to Cedar Falls became a weekly necessity, adding hours to already long days but providing them with the goods they needed to survive. Reverend Matthews arrived on a Thursday afternoon, his black coat dusty from the road and his face grave with concern. He sat stiffly in Martha's parlor, declining her offer of coffee as he delivered his warning. "Some of the congregation are questioning your right to this land, Mrs. Coleman," he said, his voice heavy with reluctant duty. "There is talk of involving the territorial authorities, of having your moral fitness evaluated." "My moral fitness?" Martha's voice rose despite her efforts to remain calm. "I've harmed no one, stolen nothing, broken no laws. What exactly am I accused of?" "Living in sin," they say. "Harboring a vagrant, defying the natural order that keeps communities safe and godly." Martha stood, her spine straight as a rifle barrel. "Then let them come with their accusations. I will not be driven from my own home by gossip and fear." Despite the mounting pressure from the town, Martha and Jake's bond only strengthened. They worked together with increased determination, their shared defiance creating an intimacy deeper than words. When the townspeople tried to isolate them, they found solace in each other's company. When threats multiplied, they discovered courage they had not known they possessed. Despite the external pressure, Martha and Jake created their own world of quiet contentment, working together to paint the new cattle pen and finding solace in shared labor. The white paint gleamed fresh against the prairie backdrop, a symbol of renewal that no amount of town hostility could diminish. Martha began singing again, her voice growing stronger with each passing day as she reclaimed the music her late husband had silenced. The melodies drifted across the homestead as she worked, old hymns and folk songs that seemed to heal something broken inside both of them. Jake found himself drawn closer to the house during his tasks, magnetized by the sound of her voice rising and falling with the prairie wind. Jake learned to express affection through small gestures, understanding that Martha valued actions over empty words. He left wildflowers on her doorstep each morning, gathered from the meadow beyond the wheat field. He shared memories of his childhood in the Montana Territory, speaking of his father, his ranch, and the horses they had raised before the drought destroyed everything. They developed domestic rhythms that felt both natural and revolutionary. Martha kneaded bread while Jake split firewood, the sound of his axe providing counterpoint to her humming. They shared meals in comfortable silence, communicating through glances and shared understanding rather than constant conversation. "I had forgotten what peace felt like," Martha confessed one evening as they sat on the porch watching sunset paint the sky crimson. "For years, I thought survival was enough." "I was wrong," Jake nodded, whittling a piece of cedar into a smooth handle for her broken garden hoe. "I spent so many years running from one place to another, I forgot what it meant to have a home. This place, with you, it feels like something worth defending." These peaceful moments were constantly interrupted by the town, this ongoing hostility. But Martha and Jake found strength in their partnership that neither had possessed alone. Martha realized she was no longer merely surviving but beginning to truly live for the first time since her children's deaths. Jake discovered that having something to protect gave his life a purpose beyond mere existence. The homestead represented more than shelter. It had become a sanctuary where two damaged souls could heal together. However, their happiness remained fragile, threatened by forces beyond their control. The townspeople, as anger continued to simmer, waiting for the right moment to boil over into something more dangerous than midnight fires. Reverend Adams arrived with a marriage certificate, suggesting that if the town was going to gossip regardless, they might as well give him a legitimate reason. His weathered face showed both understanding and resignation as he explained his reasoning. "Better to face their judgment as husband and wife than to let them destroy what you have built with their suspicions," he said, setting the document on Martha's kitchen table. "I have seen good people torn apart by smaller scandals." Martha and Jake decided to marry immediately, with only the Reverend as witness beneath the great oak tree that had sheltered the homestead for decades. The morning was crisp with autumn, despite frost glittering on the grass like scattered diamonds as they exchanged simple vows. "I take you as you are, with all your scars and stories," Martha said, her voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment. "And I promise to stand with you against whatever comes," Jake replied, his calloused hands gentle as he held hers. As they spoke their vows, armed riders appeared on the distant hill, their silhouettes dark against the pale sky. The men fired shots into the air and shouted declarations that they would not recognize any unholy union performed outside proper church walls. Martha faced the hostile riders with fierce courage, her wedding dress whipping in the prairie wind as she defended her right to choose her own path. "This man has shown me more respect and kindness than any of you have offered," she called out, her voice carrying across the distance. "While he worked to build something good, you have skulked in darkness like cowards." One of the riders spurred his horse closer, his face twisted with rage. "You have brought shame on decent women everywhere with your wanton behavior." Jake stepped protectively in front of Martha, his hand resting on the handle of his skinning knife. "The lady has made her choice freely. Respect it or move along." The confrontation escalated when the lead rider attempted to grab Martha's arm, claiming authority to restore moral order. In the struggle that followed, the man received a deep cut on his hand from Jake, his blade, blood spattering the frosted ground as he retreated cursing. The other men reluctantly departed after their wounded leader, but not before promising that the matter was far from settled. The wedding ceremony concluded with a kiss that sealed their commitment despite the world's opposition. Their first night as husband and wife was spent quietly by the fireplace, finally at peace with their choice despite the resistance they faced from every quarter. When snow began covering the prairie in thick white drifts, Martha and Jake settled into married life with quiet determination, no longer hiding their relationship but living it openly despite the community's persistent disapproval. The homestead became their fortress against the world's judgment, a place where their love could grow without interference. They focused on practical matters that carried the weight of shared purpose. Come spring, they would need to plant larger fields, repair the windmill damaged by autumn storms, and prepare better tools for the expanded farming operation they planned. These ordinary tasks now held deeper meaning because they represented a future built together. Jake constructed a workshop in the space where the barn had stood, using salvaged materials and timber hauled from the creek bottom. Martha converted the back bedroom into a proper sewing room, where she could take in mending work to supplement their income. Every improvement felt like a small victory against those who wanted them to fail. "You have made me into a new person," Martha told Jake one evening as they planned their spring planting by lamplight. "I was just surviving before you came, existing without truly living." "You did the same for me," he replied, his arm around her shoulders as they studied the seed catalogs that had arrived from Kansas City. "I had forgotten what it meant to belong somewhere, to be wanted rather than just tolerated." The townspeople maintained their cold distance, but Martha and Jake had stopped caring about their approval. They found friendship with the German family that had settled beyond Cedar Creek, people who understood what it meant to be outsiders seeking acceptance in an unforgiving land. Sheriff Wilson made occasional visits, more from friendship than official duty, bringing news from the territorial capital and warnings about cattle thieves operating in the area. He had grown to respect their determination and quietly admired their refusal to be driven away by prejudice. As winter deepened, Martha and Jake spent long evenings by the fire, reading aloud from books ordered through the mail and making plans that stretched years into the future. They spoke of possibly raising horses, of building a larger house, of the children they might yet be blessed with despite their advancing years. The story concluded with them planning their future while snow covered the scars of their past trials, not erasing the painful memories but bringing peace to wounded hearts. Their love had survived fire, gossip, and violence, becoming something unshakable that neither storm nor malicious tongues could destroy. In the vast loneliness of the prairie, they had found each other and created something precious that would endure.